she sent one last message home on the evening of December the 1st, 2018. A photograph. A Christmas tree glittering with lights in the heart of Auckland City. A young woman on an adventure, sharing a moment of wonder with her family thousands of miles away. It was the kind of image you'd scroll past without a second thought. Ordinary, warm, full of life. It was the last time Grace Millane's family ever heard from her. Within hours, that life would be extinguished in a hotel apartment just blocks away from where that photograph was taken. And the man responsible would spend the following days lying to police, buying a suitcase, going on another date, and burying her body in the forest. For 7 days, her family waited. For 7 days, they held on to hope. Then came the call that shattered everything. This is the story of Grace Millane, a young woman full of dreams, cut down on the very night of her 22nd birthday. It is a story of deception, of a predator hiding in plain sight, and of a family's unimaginable fight for justice on the other side of the world.
Every case leaves behind a story. Some truths stay buried. Some mysteries refuse to fade. The evidence grows cold, but the questions remain. Every crime leaves a witness.
Grace Emmy Rose Millane was born on the 2nd of December 1996 in Brentwood, Essex. She grew up in Wickford, a quiet commuter town not far from the Thames estuary, the youngest child and only daughter of David and Gillian Millane. She had 2 older brothers, Michael and Declan, and by all accounts, she was the warmth at the center of that family. Outgoing, generous, the kind of person who lit up a room simply by walking into it. She attended St. Thomas More High School in Westcliff-on-Sea, where she studied media, English, and fine art. From there, she went to the University of Lincoln, graduating in September 2018 with a bachelor's degree in advertising and marketing. She was 21 years old, full of ambition, and she had a plan. That plan was a year-long backpacking trip around the world. It was the dream she'd been building toward since childhood, and the family knew it. Grace had already done a 6-week group tour of South America earlier that year. Peru, Colombia, all of it. She'd loved every moment. Now she was going solo. New Zealand first, then Australia, then Asia. She called or messaged her parents almost every day, sending photographs, sharing stories, checking in with her brothers. By the time she landed in Auckland on the 20th of November 2018, she had been traveling for weeks and had not missed a single day of contact with the people she loved. That was simply who Grace was. She was staying at the Base Backpackers Hostel in central Auckland, a lively hub for young travelers just like her. She had plans to explore the Upper North Island before moving on to Australia. She had her whole itinerary mapped out, her whole future stretching ahead of her. But no one who cares about you can protect you from a predator they never knew existed. On the 30th of November 2018, Grace matched with a man on the dating app Tinder. His name, though it would not be publicly revealed for more than 2 years due to court suppression orders in New Zealand, was Jesse Shane Kempson. He was 26 years old. He was originally from the Wellington region, born in Lower Hutt in December 1991, and had grown up in Wainuiomata and Porirua. By 2018, he was living in Auckland and working in sales for a consulting firm. He was presentable. He was plausible. He was charming. At the time, that was all Grace could have known. What she could not have known was that Jesse Kempson was already a man with a history of violence toward women. A history that had never resulted in charges being laid against him. A history that had remained invisible to the world while he continued to move through it. They arranged to meet on the 1st of December. December the 1st began like any other day for Grace. She made contact with her family. She sent messages. She was excited about the date, the way any young person might be. Cautiously optimistic, curious about who she might be meeting. At around 5:45 that evening, Grace met Jesse Kempson in central Auckland. What followed was several hours of bar hopping through the city. CCTV cameras from multiple locations around Auckland captured the two of them together. In the footage, they appear relaxed. They look like any young couple on a first date. Drinks, conversation, laughter. At around 9:30 that evening, the cameras captured them entering the City Life Hotel on Queen Street together. Kempson was staying in an apartment there. The cameras caught them stepping into the lift. At 9:40 p.m., Grace Millane was seen alive for the last time. What happened in that apartment over the next hours, only one person fully knows. And that person has lied about it from the very beginning. The following morning was the 2nd of December. It was Grace's birthday. Grace's family sent messages. They sent birthday wishes. They waited for the reply that always came, because Grace always replied, because that was who she was. But there was nothing. No message, no call, no photograph from some beautiful New Zealand hillside with a smiling caption. Just silence. At first, there was the hope that she had simply had a big night, that she was sleeping in, that the phone was on silent. But hours passed, then a day, then two. The silence stretched on in a way that felt deeply, viscerally wrong to people who knew her. Meanwhile, in his apartment at the City Life Hotel, Jesse Kempson was doing something that defies comprehension. In the hours immediately after Grace's death, Kempson picked up his phone. He did not call for help. He did not call anyone at all. Instead, he searched the internet. First for Waitakere Ranges, the forested wilderness to the west of Auckland. Then, 6 minutes later, he searched for the hottest fire. He was already thinking about disposal. And then, while Grace's body was still in that room, he took 7 intimate photographs of her. Let that settle for a moment. Grace Millane was dead, and Jesse Kempson was on his phone, taking photographs. The following morning, the 2nd of December, while Grace's family in Essex were sending birthday messages and waiting for a reply that would never come, Kempson left the apartment. CCTV captured him at a shop at 8:14 in the morning, buying a large suitcase. He bought cleaning products. He hired a rental car. He returned to the apartment and he put Grace's body inside the suitcase. Investigators would later say he had struggled to make her fit. Then he did something that, even now, is almost impossible to process. He went on a date. While Grace remained in that suitcase, in that room, Jesse Kempson met another woman he had matched with on Tinder. He spent time with her as though nothing had happened, as though there was no body waiting for him when he got back. He returned. He rented a carpet cleaning machine. He scrubbed the room. He bought a shovel. On the 3rd of December, 2 days after Grace's death, and 1 day after what should have been her birthday, Kempson loaded the suitcase into the rental car, drove west out of Auckland, and turned into the Waitakere Ranges. Deep in that forest, near an access road, he dug a shallow grave. He buried Grace Millane in it, in a suitcase, in the ground, in the dark. Then he drove back to the city, and he went back to his life. Back in Essex, the Millane family's concern had deepened into dread. By the 5th of December, Grace had been missing for 4 days. She had not responded to birthday messages, had not posted anything on social media, and her phones were going straight to voicemail. Her brother Michael spoke to the media. He said it was completely out of character for Grace not to be in contact. That was the phrase that crystallized what everyone around her already felt. This was not Grace. Something was wrong. The family reported Grace missing to New Zealand police, and the investigation began. What happened next was a piece of detective work that would prove crucial. Officers began reviewing CCTV footage from across central Auckland, piecing together Grace's movements on the evening of December the 1st. The footage placed her at multiple bars and restaurants in the city, and then, unmistakably, entering the City Life Hotel with a man. That man was quickly identified and brought in for questioning. When police first spoke to Kempson, what they encountered was not the panicked demeanor of someone with something to hide. It was something far more calculated. Detective Inspector Scott Beard, the lead investigator on the case, would later describe the experience of interviewing Kempson for the first time. Kempson was calm. He was composed. He was, as Beard put it, very believable and very presentable. He told police that he and Grace had parted ways at around 10 p.m., that they had gone their separate directions, that he had no idea where she was. But the CCTV footage told a different story. It showed Grace entering the hotel with Kempson. It showed her never leaving. It showed Kempson leaving alone the next morning with luggage. He was lying. Every officer working the case could see it, but they needed to find Grace. On the 8th of December, the missing persons investigation was formally upgraded to a homicide inquiry. David Millane, Grace's father, had flown to New Zealand. He stood in front of cameras in Auckland and made an appeal that was carried around the world. He spoke about his daughter, outgoing, fun-loving, family-orientated. He described how she had been bombarding her family with photographs and messages. He said she had never given them a reason to worry. He stood there, a father 10,000 miles from home, holding himself together with everything he had, and he asked, if anyone had seen Grace, please come forward. It was one of the most heartbreaking press conferences in recent memory, and it was already too late. Later that same day, Kempson was arrested and charged with murder. He was brought in for a second formal interview. This time, the veneer of calm began to crack. He admitted, through what witnesses described as audible crying, that Grace had died in his company. He claimed he had panicked, that he had not known what to do. He claimed her death had been an accident, something that had happened during consensual activity. He still denied that he had killed her, but then he told police where he had taken her. And the following morning, on the 9th of December, a search team moved into the Waitakere Ranges. They found her. Grace Millane was recovered from a shallow grave, buried in a suitcase, less than 2 weeks after she had touched down in Auckland. Detective Inspector Scott Beard was there when she was found. Footage captured the moment he spoke to the waiting media. He was visibly shaken. The words he chose were simple. They had found Grace. The months that followed were an agony of waiting for the Millane family. Kempson pleaded not guilty. A trial date was set for November 2019, and with that plea, the full weight of what lay ahead became clear. Grace's family would have to sit in a courtroom and listen as every detail of their daughter's final hours was laid bare before a jury. What no one outside the investigation yet knew was how much evidence had accumulated against Kempson. Evidence that told a story not of panic, but of premeditation, of method, of someone who had done exactly what he meant to do. The trial opened at Auckland High Court on the 4th of November 2019. Crown Prosecutor Robin McCoubry began his opening address with words that silenced the room. Grace can't tell us. Those 4 words carried the weight of everything. Grace could not tell the jury what had happened in that apartment. She could not describe the final moments of her life. She could not speak for herself. The evidence would have to speak for her. And it did. The CCTV footage was shown in its entirety. Footage of Grace and Kempson at bars across Auckland, apparently enjoying each other's company. Footage of them entering the City Life Hotel together. Ordinary, almost unremarkable. And then came the footage that dismantled everything Kempson had told police. He had claimed he was in a drunken stupor until 9 or 10 in the morning. He had claimed the large bag in his room had never been used. He had presented himself throughout his police interview as a man overwhelmed and confused, a man who had no idea what to do after an accident. The cameras had recorded a different man entirely. At 8:14 in the morning, while his claimed stupor was supposedly still in full effect, CCTV placed Kempson at a shop, buying a suitcase. Not the bag already in his room, a new one. Then cleaning products. Then a carpet cleaning machine hired later that same day. Then, captured clearly on footage that the jury watched in silence, Jesse Kempson, in a supermarket aisle, buying a shovel. Every lie he had told had been recorded, without him knowing, by the cameras of Auckland City. There were dozens of them, and they had caught everything. The forensic evidence was equally devastating. Pathologists concluded that Grace had died from manual strangulation, sustained pressure applied to her neck. Prosecutors told the jury that it would have taken between 5 and 10 minutes for Grace to die this way. 5 to 10 minutes. That is not an accident. That is a decision made and held for the entire time it took a young woman to lose consciousness and die. Prosecutors also placed before the jury the 7 photographs Kempson had taken of Grace's body after her death. The Crown called them trophy images, evidence of what the prosecutor described as a morbid sexual interest in her death. The sentencing judge would later describe the act of taking those photographs as depraved and as proof of a total absence of empathy. The internet searches were entered into evidence. Searched in the window when Grace must already have been dead. Waitakere Ranges, the hottest fire, disposal. These were not the searches of a man in shock. These were the searches of a man who knew exactly what he was going to do next. Kempson's defense rested on a single claim, that Grace had died accidentally during consensual erotic asphyxiation, that what happened in that apartment was something she had agreed to, something that had simply gone too far, and that his behavior afterward, the searches, the suitcase, the shovel, the Tinder date with another woman while Grace lay dead, was the behavior of a man paralyzed by panic and grief.
It was, in essence, an argument that asked the jury to look at every piece of evidence they had seen and find another explanation for all of it. The prosecution was having none of it. Crown Prosecutor Brian Dickey stood before the jury and addressed the defense's central claim with a directness that left no room for ambiguity. He told them, "This is not a little bit of sex gone wrong." He said that Grace could not consent to her own murder. He pointed to the 5 to 10 minutes it would have taken her to die, the sustained, unrelenting pressure that never stopped, and he asked the jury what kind of accident looks like that. He pointed to the photographs taken of her body. He pointed to the man who had, within hours of her death, been searching for the hottest fire. He pointed to the man who had gone on a date the following day. The prosecution also called 3 women from Kempson's recent past, all found through his Tinder history. What they described chilled the courtroom. One had met Kempson at the City Life Hotel just 2 weeks before Grace's death. During their encounter, he had choked her. She had not been alarmed enough at the time to report it. She had put it down to a preference he had mentioned. Another witness described a date that had turned terrifying. Kempson had pinned her down and choked her until she feared she was going to die. She had only got him to stop by pretending to lose consciousness. 2 weeks before Grace Millane walked into that hotel. The same hotel. The same method. This was not an accident waiting to happen. This was a pattern already in motion. On the 22nd of November 2019, after approximately 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty of murder. The verdict was unanimous. In the public gallery, David and Gillian Millane wept. Kempson showed no emotion as the verdict was read aloud. Outside the courtroom, David Millane faced the cameras one more time. His voice was steady, but the weight behind every word was unmistakable. The verdict of murder, he said, would be welcomed by every member of the Millane family and the friends of Grace. But then he said something else. Something that stayed with everyone who heard it. It will not reduce the pain and the suffering we have had to endure over the past year. And then, she did not deserve to be murdered in such a barbaric way on her gap year. He mentioned the people of New Zealand. He said they had opened their hearts to Grace and to his family, and that he could not express his gratitude for the kindness they had been shown. In the weeks after Grace's disappearance, New Zealanders had held candlelight vigils. They had left flowers. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern had made a tearful public statement, offering an apology to the Millane family on behalf of New Zealand. Sorry that such a thing had happened in their country, to someone who had come there with such an open heart. It was, in its own way, a testament to who Grace was. The grief of a nation for someone they had never met. Jesse Kempson was sentenced on the 21st of February 2020. He was given life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years.
In delivering the sentence, Justice Simon Moore spoke about the vulnerability of Grace in her final moments. The Court of Appeal, in later proceedings, would describe it in terms that remain among the most haunting in the case record. Intoxicated, they said, in a strange hotel room, naked in the arms of a comparative stranger with whom she thought she had clicked and could therefore trust, and with his hands about her throat. Unable to cry out, unable to breathe, lapsing into unconsciousness. It is impossible to read those words without being shaken by them, by the intimacy of the betrayal, by the trust that was so completely and deliberately violated. At sentencing, Grace's mother Jillian spoke about the hole left in the world by her daughter's absence, about the family Grace would never start, the adventures she would never take, the person she would never become. Her brother spoke about what it had been like to sit through a trial and hear his sister's name attached to details that no family should ever have to hear. The court heard that Kempson had shown no remorse, that he continued to deny the full nature of his actions, that a pre-sentence report found he had made no effort toward rehabilitation. He sat in the dock and said nothing. But the story of Jesse Kempson was not finished. And when it became complete, it was even darker than anyone had known. After Grace's disappearance in December 2018, 2 other women had come forward to police with their own accounts of Kempson. Both had been unable to come forward publicly at the time because of the suppression orders surrounding Kempson's identity. But investigations were launched quietly, in parallel with the murder case. The first woman had been Kempson's girlfriend. They had met on Tinder in 2016 and moved in together. What followed was a sustained period of abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, and financial. The woman described an incident in January 2017 in which Kempson had chased her through the house with a knife before placing it to her throat. She had fled in April of that year and obtained a protection order, but no criminal charges were laid at the time. When she later saw a blurred image of Kempson on television in coverage of Grace Millane's disappearance, she said she had a gut instinct that it was him. Her whole world, she said, came crashing down around her again. The second woman had been a young British woman, newly arrived in New Zealand, who had met Kempson on Tinder in April 2018, just months before Grace. She described what happened in terms that mirror exactly the kind of calculated, controlled behavior seen throughout this case. In October and November of 2020, Jesse Kempson faced 2 separate judge-alone trials for offenses relating to both women. He was found guilty of all 9 charges: sexual violation, rape, assault with a weapon, threatening to kill. He received a further 11 years imprisonment to be served concurrently alongside his sentence for Grace's murder. In December 2020, the New Zealand Supreme Court finally lifted the suppression order that had kept Kempson's name from the public for over 2 years. The detective in charge of the case, Scott Beard, urged any further victims to come forward. He described Kempson as callous, as narcissistic, as a serial predator who had operated within the ordinary fabric of daily life, using a dating app, charming women, appearing to be exactly the kind of normal, presentable young man that nobody would think twice about. Beard said that there could well be other women out there, other women who had crossed paths with Jesse Kempson and survived, other stories that were never told. What does a case like this leave behind? It leaves a family that will never be the same. David Millane, Grace's father, stood at the center of this story throughout, flying to New Zealand, making that devastating press conference appeal, sitting through a trial that required him to hear things no parent should ever hear. He returned home to Essex after the trial and became ill. He died not long afterward, at the age of 62. His family described their heartbreak. He had fought to see justice for Grace, and he had, but he carried the weight of it until the end. It leaves questions about systems that allowed a man like Kempson to remain invisible until it was too late. The abuse of his former girlfriend, reported but not charged. the woman raped months before Grace died. The chances that existed to intercept him before a young woman from Essex lost her life in a hotel room in Auckland. And it leaves something else, too. A foundation called Love Grace, established by the Millane family in the aftermath of the trial, dedicated to supporting victims of domestic violence and encouraging conversations about healthy relationships and personal safety. Grace's name turned into something that might protect others from what she could not be protected from. Grace Millane arrived in New Zealand on the 20th of November 2018. She had a backpack, 2 phones, and an itinerary that stretched all the way to Asia. She had already crossed South America. She had done it largely on her own, calling home every day, sending photographs, making her family feel like they were there with her. That was Grace. She didn't just go and see the world. She brought the people she loved along with her. She was the kind of person who sent a photograph of a Christmas tree at 9 p.m. on a Saturday night, not because anything remarkable had happened, but because she thought her family would smile at it. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She was 21 years old, newly graduated, standing at the very beginning of everything. She would have turned 22 at midnight. She never did. Jesse Shane Kempson is currently serving a life sentence at Auckland Prison. His minimum non-parole period is 17 years. Every appeal he filed, against the murder conviction, against the sexual violence convictions, has been dismissed. He has shown no remorse. A pre-sentence report found he made no effort toward rehabilitation. When he was asked in court whether he had anything to say, he had nothing. And Grace's father, David Millane, the man who flew 10,000 miles to find his daughter, who stood in front of cameras and held himself together when most people would have broken, who sat through every day of that trial, went home to Essex and became ill. He died at 62. He never got to see the suppression orders lifted. He never got to hear Jesse Kempson's name spoken aloud in his country. But he had heard the verdict. He had been there when the jury said guilty. He had stood outside that Auckland courthouse and told the world that Grace was their sunshine. He saw justice for his daughter. That is something. The Love Grace Foundation, established by the Millane family in the aftermath of the trial, continues to support victims of domestic violence and fund conversations about healthy relationships and personal safety. Grace's name is now attached to work that protects other people from the kind of violence that took her. It is an imperfect comfort. No foundation changes what happened. Nothing does. But somewhere, a young woman is safer because Grace Millane existed. She will be missed forever. If this is your first time on Cold Witness, welcome. We make investigative documentaries like this weekly. If you want to be here for the next one, subscribe. That's all it takes. And if this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. Tell us what you think. We read every one.